And the point is that if you take measurement after measurement after measurement, and you slow it a little bit, that you give them a bit more freedom, and then new measurements, and then a little bit of freedom again, then they are just so shaken that the resistance is broken. And a real dictator works that way. But you know, I also know from some policemen personally that they hate the situation as it is now, and that they hate having to be sent to demonstrations, anti-corona demonstrations, because they say, I don't want it, but I lose everything. And if I show that I have pity with those people, then other police agents are laughing at me. So they keep their mouth. And I can understand that, because it's so difficult. You're losing so much if you are different. But there's one thing that they all overlook. We are living in our Western paradigm, and that can only think in terms of improving our cells, improving our brain, and they simply have no clue how great our brain is, how powerful our thoughts are, how powerful our mind is,
and our soul,
and that there will never ever be a robot that will get the soul of a human being. If you look at the part of the study guide is talking about how the technocrats look at human beings, and they see human beings as the dogs of Pavlov, and that you can program them, and that almost robot-like. And that's not a human being. That's not our creative potential. And that's absolutely going to revolt. It will not revolt in everybody, because there will always a group of people who say, this is nice, I don't need to do that much and I have my income, etc. But most people will feel the knock on the door inside of their creativity. And there are always people who find creative ways just to escape the rules. Look at what is happening now, because they have the wrong ideas about what a human being is. They don't have an idea about the soul. They have no idea about spirituality. It's all kicked out. Science has to be the religion, and the scientist the priest. You know, it's such a revolt against what a human being really is, what a soul really is, what your inner authenticity really is, what your creativity is, what the power of your mind is. It's simply not gonna work. And this is the beginning, this time of the blackness in the world and all these dystopian things. This is the beginning, this is the birth of the combining of the feminine and masculine, of spirit and matter. And we are the persons who have to give birth to that. But that's the development, and that's why I'm so absolutely hopeful.
Hello everyone, this is Baptiste Pap, and today we have a treat for you. Today we are in the sanctuary, the beautiful sanctuary of Karen Hamaker-Zondag. And Karen Hamaker-Zondag is a very special person. She's a great researcher. Karen, you are an astrologer.
Yes.
You are an expert in the Jungian psychology. You studied social geography and planning. You are the author of 36 books. And for over 25 years you have been doing research on power and power structures and who basically controls the world. And I believe you have lectured all over the world on psychology and astrology.
Yes.
Well, it's so good to finally meet you. It's an honor to meet you. We are big fans of your work, and it's incredible if you look at your body of work, what you have done. And I was wondering, what drives you? What is your drive? Is it curiosity?
In a way, it's curiosity, but I want to understand how your mind ticks, how it works, and it's a never-ending story. There's so much that you can do with your mind, and how your psyche adapts to the world, how your vision is, but also how you react on unconscious things, and it's so fascinating. And in understanding that, you start to understand not only yourself, but also the world.
Yes, and maybe a little bit more of yourself as well.
Of course, especially of yourself. But when you understand more of yourself, you get more relaxed,
Yes.
you get more self-acceptance,
Yes.
and then you are more open to understand the world.
Yes.
Then you're not that much projecting anymore.
Yes. So, Karen, you are an astrologer. How long have you been into astrology?
From early 70s of the last century.
Oh, so that's 40 years.
50.
50 years
50
now.
years,
Wow,
yes,
incredible.
yes.
So people that I'm talking with, they've told me that there are, let's say, very powerful and influential gentlemen, and these men are very knowledgeable of how the administration of the world works. And people told me that those influential, powerful people, they base almost everything on astrology, and that the administrators of the world have really high-level astrologers that guide them through everything. And I thought that's really interesting. So because they don't do anything without knowing what the planets are saying.
Well, I don't know if everybody is doing that, but
Yes.
I know that astrology is very well accepted in the highest circles.
Yes.
But not only astrology. Actually, if you are in those highest circles,
Yes.
you understand that you cannot explain everything with statistics.
Yes.
So they start to be open to irrational things.
Yes.
So I also know that people are working with the I Ching
Yes.
and astrology and those things. Yes.
Yes. And can you say something about why astrology is so popular in these highest circles?
Well, you cannot predict precisely with
Yes.
all these things,
Yes.
but you can understand tendencies.
Yes.
And it gives you warnings, and it helps you
Yes.
to give an extra orientation.
Yes.
And if you ask a question in astrology, you can clearly see if the time is ripe for something or not, or where the dangers are. And then you have to take the decision yourself, of course. But astrology can be a guide. It can be helping you to understand another picture than you have in your mind of something.
Beautiful. I realize that most people don't really understand what astrology is. So could you explain to us what is astrology and why is it so important?
Well, actually, astrology tells about the relationship,
Yeah.
about the movements in heaven, and what is happening on earth.
Yes.
And it started in the old Mesopotamian, Babylonian times, where they observed the heavens and they saw the planets, which they didn't understand that were planets at
Yes.
that time. But they saw those moving objects in heavens, and they noted where they were, and they also wrote down what happened on earth.
Yes.
And after centuries, they started to discover that every time when a certain planet that they called Ninorto or Nergash or whatever was there and there, they saw this kind of things is happening at Earth. So they
Yes.
saw a correlation. And they didn't think about influence, they thought a correlation.
Yes.
And they started to study those correlations. And because they considered the planets as gods, they saw the movement of the planets as the writing of the gods in heaven and a message of the gods. And they said, if we can understand what the gods want to tell us, we can communicate with the gods and start to negotiate a different fate.
Yes.
And so they never have believed there is just a fate, but they believed that they could negotiate with the gods as soon as they understood that language. And so from 3000 BC until actually the Greek time, they have done this.
Yes.
They have written this down, and we have clay tablets in which we can read how they wrote it down and how their omen, their predictions were.
Yes.
And so that was the first beginning, simply watching what is happening there and what is happening here.
Okay.
And actually from that body of knowledge,
Yes.
Western astrology has developed. And I think that astrology is actually one of the earliest methods of mankind
Yes.
to understand some kind of order
Yes.
in the seemingly chaos around him.
Yes.
And in every culture,
Yeah.
the relationship between heaven and earth has played a role, and
Yes.
and slowly the techniques were more sophisticated and developed, and new influences came, new ideas came. But there is the beginning,
Yeah.
and so there is no influence of the stars, as people say. Many people think that astrologers believe that the stars are having you in their power, which is not true, because there was something happened. The axis of the Earth is tilted, and so we have that tilted movement around the sun. But it's not only tilted; the axis of the Earth itself makes a very slow movement itself, and it makes this movement in about 26,000 years. And it means that now the axis is directed to the pole star, but it won't be that long anymore because it's moving away. But that means that it's moving away 1 degree in 72 years. And it means that the Babylonians, having studied this 3,000 years, they got confused at a certain point because they saw that somehow those planets came in different sections, and so they had noted down what kind of things could happen, and there was a kind of shift. And the Greek came and they solved this problem, and they said, well, we are not going to take the real stars as a background, but we take the year of the sun. The sun, the Earth evolves around the sun in its orbit, and we divide that orbit in 12 equal pieces, and we call that the signs of the zodiac. And it's 360 degrees, and now we measure the planets against that zodiac. So it's an artificial zodiac, and that means that there is no influence. But then you see that science, nowadays science says, oh, then it can't be, then it's just rubbish. But that's the scientific paradigm of this moment, that we can only think in causality. Something must have a cause, and then you have an effect. But there's another way of thinking also, and that's more the former Eastern way of thinking, that says that everything that is born in the same time shares the same time quality and is expressing a same energy. And that means that if the planets are there at a certain time and you are born in that time, that those two happenings share the same time quality, and so you can read from the planets not their influence on you, but it's a kind of clock on which you can look. Okay, it's that time for me. And so the old Eastern way of thinking is that every time has its own meaning, its own quality. But in the West we see time just as ticking, just moments, and it has no quality. And if you look at astrology from that Western perspective, you cannot explain that it works. If you look from it from the Eastern perspective, then you can understand that simply in this time quality of the birth of a person, there was something that happened on earth, there was something that happened in heaven, and it all shares the same energy. And I can give you a kind of anecdote about that. That a befriended astrologer got a daughter, and he phoned me and he said, my daughter is born, and he was, of course, congratulations, etc. And he talked about the situation on heaven of that day. And that day there was a conflict in heaven between Mars and Pluto. And Mars is an energetic planet. And if that is dominant in a chart, the child needs to show a lot of energy. And Pluto is intensifying that and can even overreact, but can also be somebody who can be a kung fu fighter. So it can be positive, can be negative. You can't see that from a chart. Now, what happened is that conflict was in heaven. So we said, that's quite something, this child. And that day, there was almost an accident at sea. There was a ship, an oil tanker, and that had difficulties with maneuvering. And it was just a few meters away from, how do you call it, an oil island in sea. Now, if that ship had touched it, it would have given a big fire like the Brent fire. And it was also the same day that Khomeini had spoken the fatwa on Salman Rushdie. So it was quite a day. And then at the end of the day, at the telephone, we were talking, and we said, okay, the ship was very close to that island, but that artificial island for oil, and I forgot the name, but it didn't touch it. And so the quality of this time is this danger, but it's not going to be fulfilled. And so our conclusion was Salman Rushdie will stay alive, and the daughter will be quite a handful, but it's not a problem. And until now, we were right. And that's that way of looking. So you see the time quality, but if I tell this to Western people, they say she's psychotic. How can you see that? But it's just seeing the different signals of their time quality. And for an astrologer, he understands the time quality of a constellation. But it's not that you are that the time quality only says this and this is going to happen and nothing else. There is a field of meaning, a field of possibilities, and you have to develop your character. You take your own decisions, and that means that two people with the same horoscope still can develop into different personalities because of the choices they make in developing a part of the chart or a part of the chart not.
So can you make the distinction of what you actually can predict with astrology and what you cannot predict with astrology? For instance, we're now here just outside of Amsterdam, and maybe people who know that you're an astrologer come to you and say, hey Karen, can you please tell me if Ajax will be champion of the Netherlands this year? That's not how you can use astrology, of course.
No, you see possibilities. And and we have the birth chart, which tells you what is actually your blueprint, and it's you can see it as the drawing of a house that you still have to build, and you can make the choice to use bad materials or good materials, and that's one thing. And the other thing is that if you have your birth chart, that is a planetary pattern, the sun, moon, and the planets, but everything in heavens moves, and it means that it moves through your chart. And sometimes it will come on a spot where it touches another planet. And then if this energy and that energy come together, then you will be in this time quality with these kind of things that can happen, these inner workings, these next steps in your development. But you still don't know what exactly is going to happen. You only see those options, and you know that this is the field of meanings you are in now. It seems as if your psyche now wants you to experience a certain kind of things, or read certain kind of things, or meet certain kinds of people, just to make the next step in your development. That's the second part of astrology. There's a third part of astrology. That's what we call horary astrology, and that is the type of astrology we use to study world situations, charts of countries, and answering questions. So if somebody is asking me a question, I can note down the time of that question, and then the chart is the birth of that question, and the chart gives indications if it's more favorable or less favorable. But if it's less favorable, it not always says no, but it can be, if it's less favorable and you can win, maybe you're not happy with that you have been won. So in my experience, there is nothing that is fully already predicted and fully fixed in heavens. So there's always a moving, there's always some kind of freedom. But there's one thing that is that somehow, and that's what I think so fascinating, that if people ask me a certain question which is important for them, for psychology or whatever, a decision to be taken, then you very, very, very often see that they ask that question in that moment that is totally in accordance with what is going on in their chart, as if somehow their unconscious knows the time when to ask the question. That's fascinating.
Wow. I think it's also very fascinating, and this is of course more to the personal astrology. Some people are born at a certain day, at a certain time, and they have incredible successful lives, and they don't seem to be working so hard for it. There's like an effortlessness behind it. And there are other people who are maybe born at another time and another day, and they have really hard lives. They work hard, they do their best, they try to be successful, and things just don't come off the ground. So can you talk a little bit about that some people seem to be born for success and other people struggle all their lives?
You know, it depends on what you define as success.
Yes.
And if you define it as worldly success, then you see big differences. But I don't know if everybody who is successful in society has peace of mind. And you also see people who have peace of mind and don't have the success that we see as success.
Yes.
And there's another thing to it. It's so beautiful. I think that if you understand your chart, you understand what is your dynamic and what your psyche wants to live. And we are not always conscious of that. And I've spoken once to, it was about 30 years ago, but it was very interesting, with a lawyer in America. And his chart was, well, if you look at a chart, you see that are combinations of planets and you can draw lines. There are certain combinations that belong together, and you have different colors. And the red color is that when it is a tense combination. And his chart was full of tension. And so I asked him what he did with that tension and how he felt about that. And he told me that, yes, he knew that there was tension in him and he knew the tension, but he said, I cannot live without. And that's he, and so he was one of the first lawyers who dared to defend black people in the time that there was still class segregation in America. And they have burned down his house. So he really encountered a lot of problems and struggle. But at the same time, he said, I would do it again because I need that adrenaline. I need that struggle. I need that's what I need to feel, to be alive. So if you look from a distance, you say, oh, this man, he has to struggle so much. And look, his house burned down. But looking from an outside, you still don't know how people feel in themselves. And I know people who are poor and who make the most of their life because they are really balanced and they are happy and they are creative. And I know people who are rich and who are not happy.
Or empty inside. So how would you then define success? Is that for you happiness, peace of mind, alignment with the soul? Is that success to you?
Yes, I won't, for me, I won't define it in what we in society use as the word of success. And I think the word of success isn't even the right word. I think that when you come close to yourself, to your own authenticity, to your own creativity, and you dare to live that, then you are happy no matter what happens.
So is success then realizing what your original personal blueprint is and living according to that?
Yes, if you want to define it that way, is then if you make your life to a success in that way, is that you live your potential.
Yes. And can you talk a little bit about, some people have a gift for music, like, Mozart, of course, he had a father that really was very strict and taught him from a very early age, but he had a gift for music. And some people have a gift for a certain sport. Can you talk a little bit, how can people discover, maybe through astrology, what their gift is?
In astrology, you can see that you have a talent for certain things, but you cannot see to what extent or to what level, because the chart doesn't tell if you're going to be rich because of that. The chart simply tells that if you live this potential from yourself, it's the fulfillment of your life. And so I cannot say from a chart if somebody will be famous or not. And even if somebody is becoming famous, he doesn't care. Because it's not. He's not. His personality doesn't care about being famous or not. So that's what you cannot see. But I think that astrology tells me about your psyche, your blueprint. But in our society, we think that we are totally individuals, but we are not. We are part of a chain of ancestors. And in that chain of ancestors, there have been problems that have not been solved. There have been talents that have not been developed. And somehow you see in that whole chain. It can be 6, 7, 8, 9 generations. And it comes down, and all of a sudden, it seems that heaven says, okay, now it's over. We have to do something with it. So now is a child born, and it has to live that talent. And that child will feel different from the world, feel different from its family, because there's a huge energy coming through that child. And in the chart, you can see which children do carry issues of their ancestral line, but still they are to decide what they are going to do with it. And so I cannot see if somebody is going to be very famous or not.
Okay.
But I can see what somebody needs to fulfill its potential.
Okay, so it's not like someone like Alexander the Great or Napoleon Bonaparte. They had different kind of astrology charts.
I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it.
Okay,
No.
so but it is not the case that you can see when someone is born because of the time and the place and the date that, oh, this is going to be the next Alexander the Great or something. That's not possible.
I cannot do that.
Okay, yeah, because that's something that people think that astrology is. So for people who want to, more, who want to learn more about their own astrology, what would you recommend that they start to do? Is there a book that you would recommend, or something else that you would recommend?
There is so much, and there's also so much on the internet, and there is so much rubbish also.
Absolutely.
And there are so many beautiful things also, that I think that I look for a good astrologer and start getting lessons there. And what really, really important is start in a structured way.
Yes.
Just building blocks. Because what I see, if I get students, that some have been reading around and a lot of things, and they are losing sight on what you really have to do to become a good astrologer.
Yes.
And they start totally anew. And I said, first you have to learn this, then that, and only then you can do that. So start, learn it in a structured way. Then it keeps you motivated and you don't get lost.
Karen, you have written 36 books. If people want to learn more about astrology, is there one book of yours that you would recommend and say, okay, start with that book?
I have one book in Dutch.
Yes.
Most of the books are in Dutch. And there's one little booklet about astrology for now that only tells you what you can do with astrology and not. It's called the Yellow series, a series of books, but that's directly starting to do the interpretation. Yes. So there's not one book that combines all. It's impossible. You have to, every detail has a lot of information. So that's the Yellow series, actually.
Wow. Karen, just before the interview, we were talking about Carl Jung, and there was a beautiful quote you used, and you said, power appears where love disappears. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, because it's so powerful?
Yes, that's a sentence from Jung that I came across very early, and I became so curious. How is this working? And what makes that love is disappearing? And what kind of power is then appearing? And that's actually an external form of power. That if love disappears, then you tend to want to have power over other people. When love is still there, you want to have power over yourself and over your own life. So the projection of that power hunger to others is when love disappears.
Yes. It's also because maybe you're not in alignment with your soul anymore. I interviewed Eckhart Tolle in 2012, and I interviewed him in his holiday home in Salt Spring Island in British Columbia. And there were no books, but there was only one book in his living room, and it was, you have it here too, the Red Book. And it was even a bigger version than this one. It was a really big version of the Red Book. You have a very big version here too. And he said, this is what I'm studying. And we know, of course, Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. Why is this such an important book, the Red Book?
The Red Book has been. It's not really a book that is written by Jung. It born from his imaginations, and when Jung and Freud split, Jung came in a kind of empty world. His inner world was fully alive, but he lost most of his friends. He lost his position in the academic world, and he felt that he was different from what Freud wanted to teach. And in that period, he was afraid becoming psychotic because he felt the pressure of images coming up in him. And at that time, they really believed that if a person had so much inner images, that that person was on the verge of becoming schizophrenic or psychotic. So he really was afraid that something was going to be wrong with him. And but he couldn't stop the images. And then in a December evening, he decided to sit down and just let it go. He couldn't repress it anymore. And uh, and from that moment on, he did it very often. And he just said, I'm just looking, I'm just looking, I'm writing down, I'm just looking. And that in the beginning, he wrote it down in black, I don't know the English word, but in little black books. That is this. It's also a reprint of that. And later, he decided to have him made just a folio, a letter with blank pages, and to put therein all his inner dialogues, his images. If he couldn't put it in words, he was drawing it, so it's full of drawings. And you see, that's a lot of inner work. And he discovered that there were elements in his soul that have a life of its own. And he had just, it was 2012, 1912, 1913 that it all started. And in 1909, he had a dream in which he actually had the first idea of that we as a mankind don't have only a personal unconscious with your complexes, but also a collective unconscious with collective memories and collective contents. And you see in his red book that he is discovering elements of that collective unconscious, the old wise man, his anima. And you see, this is actually the real birth of Jungian psychology. And he has been doing this active imagination. He developed that technique until 1929. Then he got a book from Richard Wilhelm, the translator of the I Ching, on Chinese alchemy, the golden flower, secret of the golden flower. And then Jung understood that what was in that book was actually also a process he had been gone through in the period that he was writing in his red book. And then it ended and he started to study alchemy. But Jung once said that the years that he worked on his inner work, he did his inner work, what is reflected in the red book contains all the elements he had built upon later and what became his Jungian psychology. So it's really the source of the Jungian psychology and a source of inner work.
Yes. For the general public, if you mention Carl Jung, Jung is still famous for coining the term synchronicity. And synchronicity is those moments when you think at first it's a coincidence, but then if you look deeper, you know there's purpose, there's power, there's meaning behind it. What is synchronicity for you? Is it as important as, because it's used so many times? Joseph Campbell uses it in his work, and Jung is so famous for it. But do you think it's really important, synchronicity?
Yes, but Jung had another opinion than most people think on it. Okay. So it's not a common phenomenon. It's not common. So it's if you think, well, this is such a coincidence, it must have a meaning. That's no synchronicity. Okay. So synchronicity is that you experience something that you in an instant know it is meaningful. So you cannot project it in it. It's just you have to experience this. Yes. And Jung says that when you I have to make another step first. In the deepest layer of our unconscious, we have the archetypes, and the archetypes contain all the knowledge and all the experiences of mankind round on a certain theme. For example, all the experiences with the theme of mother, nourishing, the bad mother, the good mother, is in that archetype. And so we have a lot of archetypes that have different human essences. And Jung says your complexes in your personal unconscious, they they are built around an archetypal core. Now, those complexes, they send you images in dreams to let you understand things of yourself, but they do it in images, so you must translate it to understand them. Those complexes are also responsible for what we call projection. That you, for example, you see somebody in the outer world, and you get irritated, and then you say, "Yeah, I get irritated because he or she did that and that." But Jung said, "No, your irritation is yours." So that person is a symbol. You could consider it as a dream symbol of something that is happening in you that is not in balance in you. So you must ask yourself, what is it in me that I got irritated by that person? And so not blaming that person, first go inside. That's the shadow work, that's the inner work.
Yes.
And that's the normal way things happen. But sometimes something can happen all of a sudden, and that you meet something in the outer world of which your complex says, this is so important for you, that the moment that happens, that you all of a sudden know in one instant, not thinking about it, but I know this is true. I know this has a meaning. And maybe I can give an example of my own life. I have the tendency to work too hard. There's so much to read and to do. And so every couple of years, I really have to sit down and say, okay, what can I skip? Because otherwise it's becoming too much. So when we were married a couple of years, had no children yet, and we were working hard, had our jobs, but I was also in all kinds of societies and activities, etc. And those were for free, so I had to work very hard to earn a living because I did so many other things for free. And so it was one Sunday morning that we sat together, and I said, we have to make a list of things that we can skip or can give clients to other people, etc., because otherwise it's going to be too much. And so we sat down and we made a list and we talked about it, and it was really good. So when we were ready, I said, okay, I said, and I hope I can get some more rest and some more peace. And there was a special sentence, but I don't know how to translate it in English. But I said that. And so we had a very old radio, and we always had it on a classic on a classic canal. And so I kicked on the radio and expecting a classical music, and it turned out I heard a sermon. It was in the church. So, and then the first thing that I heard the preacher saying was, "Well, I hope that we can get some more rest and some more peace." Those were my words. So I had said that, and I heard exactly the same words from him. And at that moment, it was king, and I knew I have to take it serious, because
this
otherwise,
is also synchronicity.
This is synchronicity. Yeah. But that is that you instantly know. But if I had sat down and said, that's curious that he said that, that's no synchronicity. So the synchronicity always has to give that emotion of an instant knowing.
So it has to be immediate.
Immediate. Yeah. And people think that synchronicity is something like something paranormal or that's the kind of things. Or if you think it's meaningful, that is synchronicity. But what Jung really meant is that it's not synchronicity. And what he also says, and that, because why is that emotion so important? He says that in synchronicity, that complex that is actually that is around that archetypal core, and in a synchronistic event, that archetypal core is just in a split second connected to the deepest layer of the unconscious, where the whole development that what you are meant to be is there. It's the movement of the cosmos is there. It's your connection to the world is there. So you are actually for one split second in accordance with a bigger movement of the cosmos, of yourself, etc. Yes. And that's what gives this.
And that's when we feel expansion.
And that is an almost religious experience. Yes. And then you know that you must not fall back in old behavior, because you have to continue in a new way. Yes. And so Jung really meant that with synchronicity, and not a kind of, this is so coincidental, it must be synchronicity.
Did he also mean like the holistic oneness experience that you have at that moment?
He didn't mention it that way, but you can deduct it from the way he describes it.
Yes. Jung also talks about receiving intuitive information while you dream. And we, of course, all know the famous sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce, he had to lay down in order to channel information. And he said he was also always, connecting with the Akashic records. Can you speak a little bit on receiving intuitive information in our dreams? What Jung had to say about that?
There are different ways. Your dreams, especially, are your unconscious, says Jung, is speaking a different language than your consciousness, and there are polarities. And if you are drifting away from the person that you should be, according to your own self, then your unconscious is going to knock on the door. And the soft knock on the door is warnings in dreams. So that's the first thing. So you can get intuitions in dreams, but simply a correction of your conscious attitude. But you can also have dreams that we call a big dream, that is not only for you, but that give a bigger picture. There's another kind of intuition. And there are also dreams that are paranormal, that you pick up things from what's going on in the world or with a certain person. So there are different types of intuitions, and it's but if you pick up a bigger thing, then still it can be part of your own psyche. So Jung always said that if a dream is paranormal, you still can do the dream interpretation, because then you can ask, from all the things in the world, why has your psyche decided to pick that to dream paranormal on it? Yes. So
is it easier to receive intuitive information while we sleep, because then the conscious mind is not so active?
We know that from parapsychology, and Jung is very much interested in parapsychology, we know from parapsychology that most of the parapsychological things that we experience are in dreams. Yes. So if we are relaxed and the conscious mind is not interfering. Yes. But the unconscious knowing is interfering a lot of times, also during waking times. For example, in America, they have statistics from the very beginning of everything, and when the railroad company started, they have statistics from the beginning of how many people were in what train, and parapsychologists found out that those trains that were involved in a very heavy accident with death, that on an average there were 10% less people in those trains than you would expect.
So unconsciously.
Yeah. And there was a group of parapsychologists that wanted to research that, and they said, we are going to find out who should have been in that train. Those who commute to their work back and forth for a certain time, and they found some people who should have been in that train but weren't, and they asked them, where weren't you in that train? And one man said, what never happened, I didn't hear the alarm, and I slept. And another said, I forgot my bag, my papers, so I had to go home and get my bag. So you can get signals in a way you don't expect. But somehow the unconscious said, you don't go in that train. And it's about 10 to 15% that we know that people are more gifted, more sensitive for those signals than other people.
Yes, but it also shows that sleep and having that time where your conscious is not so active is very important. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a researcher at the University of Utrecht, and he did his PhD on dreams. And in his research, he said if 15 minutes before you go to sleep, you focus on a question, you focus on it, then there is a chance that you get information while you sleep. Maybe not the first night, but if you just stick with it, the information will come. And this is also what, if you study the work of Edgar Cayce, he says the same thing, that if you really focus on something that you want an answer on just before you go to bed, really go to sleep, then something will try to answer that.
Yeah, but even during the day you can do that. But what we need during the day is blank spaces. that you're gazing out of the window and not being in your mind, and
Yes.
or walking in the wood with your dog and not being disturbed by your telephone. That's such a bad thing. That if you just give your it's called the white spaces. If you give your mind a couple of times a day, just 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, for those blank spaces, just being doing nothing, that's not a waste of time, because what happens is that your unconscious is then regrouping itself.
Yes.
And if you are working on a problem or have a problem, you don't even need to think about it, but somehow the unconscious is going to work with that during those times, and all of a sudden you notice that you start singing a kind of song, or thinking about a kind of book, or thinking
Yes.
about a kind of person.
Yes.
And those are little hints that, look, is what the text of the song is. There's a kind of solution. Those irrational things are then coming on your path and help you. But you must have moments during the day that you let it unconscious go, that you're just in that empty space, and then it will work during the day too. But you have to notice a lot more things. And nowadays what I see is that people are walking in the woods, just their dog is here and their phone is this, and they have their earplugs in. They don't hear the birds, they don't hear the wind in the trees, nothing. They are just absorbed in those images. They are not in their blank spaces.
Absolutely.
And so it's taking a long time. Your psyche has the time, but it will take 10, 15, 20 years, and you are not able to be creative and bringing creative solutions to problems in your life, just because of the addiction to your phone.
It's a complete addiction, and we have to spend more time without the smartphone. We have to cultivate gratitude. I think be in nature. Those are ways to connect with the higher self, the spirit, the soul. What is your word for it? How do you call it, that space where that information comes from?
I don't have really a word for that. It's and I don't know if you must see it as a kind of space where it comes from. I think that there are so many answers that we have in ourselves. But to understand those answers, the answers are given by your unconscious, and they are very often given in an image or a sound or a song, and not in words. And we expect it in words. Well, that's not going to work.
Karen, in many spiritual traditions and religions, the heart has been described as a source of wisdom. They call it the seat of the soul. For you, what is the role of the heart in all of this that we're discussing?
I think that the heart energy is a very important energy. But if you look at it from how medicine is looking at the heart, that's not what I mean. But I think that we have to go more to the Eastern or to the Indian way of looking at the heart. And so for me, living from your heart is actually living from your soul.
Beautiful. Wow. Karen, let's talk a little bit about the hypnosis of the mainstream media that's going on. I think some people still have this wrong idea that we actually have a free press, and we do not. And I think it's more clear than ever now. The technology platforms are censoring everything that is not in line with the mainstream narrative. And Bob Schwartz, who was on the board of Time Live, and this later became AOL Time Warner, the parent company of CNN, he said, "We are all in the media, we are all scribes taking dictations from the right hand of the king. The fourth estate, the free press, has been dead for decades." And I think it's more clear than ever now. What is your experience? If you look at the mainstream media, it's just owned by a few companies, and they are all taking dictations from the right hand of the king. And I think that explains why alternative media, just like John Luca, is becoming more and more popular, because people think something is not right, something is off. How do you see that? I mean, are there still people who believe the mainstream media, but there are also a lot of people who are waking up and say, okay, there is something wrong here.
Yeah, the point is that, and then we come back to what Jung said, power appears where love disappears. That if I make a sidestep first, they say we live in a democracy, but what is necessary for a democracy is well-informed people. So information is the first victim of war, and if you have the power over information, you have power over everything. And that's why the media are so important as a power instrument. And it has been of all ages, from if it's the Roman time or whatever, it has always been that way. So that means that as soon as you have the official media, you always have to be critical. And nonetheless, the people who work there can be so engulfed in the system that they really think they are doing well and that they're doing it as good as possible. But what we forget is that there are only a few sources where they get their news from. So if you own those sources, you get the same news everywhere.
Yeah.
And we all know that 80% of the mainstream is owned by just a few, through groups, a few groups. And if they have conflicts of interest, and if they have interest in what they want to pursue, then they use those media, and they will subsidize it, and they will pay them a lot. But you know what I said, this is what you see in every age. Every age has its own media problems, but nowadays we have so many platforms, and media are so important that also the people who are censored, and there's the creativity of people again, find new ways to create their own media. And it's now in the beginning, you know, it's the censorship the last two years has been so strong that you see that people are just going to other media, and still YouTube is one by far the biggest, and Facebook is by far the biggest. But you see that other are coming, they are growing, and there will come a moment that you see that people know their way in an alternative way, and you see many young people who don't look at television anymore, but only on online media. But there you also have distractions, because one of the things to take care that people just follow your lines and not their lines is giving them as much entertainment as possible.
Yes, distraction.
This is a distraction.
Yes.
And so the metaverse of Facebook is the newest distraction. And that's a kind of universe where you can do everything what you want and be who you are. And so you're away from your everyday life.
And they can have all your property.
Yes. You know, so it's not only the media, but it's also the entertainment that is in the hands of just a few, and that can be an instrument. You know, in Roman times there was the slogan, "Give the people bread and their place, and they won't rise up." And it's the same now. So there will always be a part of society that lets itself engulf in that entertainment and in the normal media, and who believe that. But there's also a critical part, and this whole crisis we are in now has shown that actually the big shift between the two, and the polarization between the two. But the problem of the media has actually always been a problem.
Wow, yeah. How can we help? Because many people have it, you know, with their relatives in their family. So many people are still hypnotized by the mainstream media, and especially now with all the information that's coming, people are fearful, so they are, you know, inclined to even listen to the mainstream media more when they feel fearful. How can we, you know, what can we do without trying to influence people too much, that they, you know, start to see that there's another reality?
Well, the point is that within the common media, there are plenty of journalists who would like to do it different, and so but who don't get a chance or don't get subsidies for their programs. So I cannot say that the whole media is a problem, but the way it's organized is a problem. And what you see is, if people are full in fear and anxiety, you have two forms of fear and anxiety. One is that if there is instant thing that happens that you can solve. And my example is always, if at this moment there is a snake here, you are frightened, but then you know that you can jump away or whatever. And so there has been a short time of stress, and then you can relax and you can go on. But if there is something that is unseen or too big, or you don't have a grip or you cannot react upon, those are the topics like aliens or climate or a virus or whatever, then another kind of anxiety develops, and that is a diffuse anxiety, and that is that belongs to another part in your brain. And once that anxiety is in your brains, you cannot think critically anymore. Simply impossible. So the only thing what is possible to let people start thinking critically is to take away the fear that puts them in a different brain position. But as long as the media are just making everything fearful and making everything even more emotional, etc., you keep the people in fear. And that's very difficult. So talking to them and explaining them can even make them more fearful. That's one thing. So we must take into account that we cannot always help them the way we would like to. And I think that the way they want to be helped is, let's get rid of the virus. That's their way.
So instead of trying to change the people around us, we have to do what Gandhi said: be the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly.
So we have to turn off mainstream media for ourselves and start to live from our own power instead of trying to influence or change other people.
And there's another thing, is that Jung was quite clear, and he did say the things that he meant, and he said, what is it in you that you want to change other people? And that's a confronting thing. So what is it in me that I want to change other people? It means that something has to be changed in myself first. And once you understand that people are in a different phase, a different situation, and once you can accept that that is simply how it is, and there is no full light without a night. So there is always a night part for us, but for them we are the night. So we must see that in perspective. So what I do is that I see it as one of the things that I can do is just inform people, read and tell them about them in an as objective way as possible. No blaming, nothing, trying to understand. And those who are able to be open enough can share it and can do something with it. And those who cannot, I can only look with love to them and try to give us the power of our minds. Or the power of our minds is so big. Send them love and wishing them all the best, and hoping that they won't have too much damage and too much problems because of the situation they are in, and maybe their anxiety will lift somehow. So I don't expect to reach everybody. I don't expect that I can help all the people, but I can only offer what my qualities are, my talents, and be who I am. And I think that if people see who you are, and if people, if you meet a person who is balanced, who is not trying to prove him or herself, and who is just, you feel comfortable with such a person. But there's something else. You don't need to prove yourself when you are with that person. So your energy is free to flow towards your own self-development. So being a balanced person means that you give other people the chance, the room and the energy to more develop themselves. That's what you can give them. And it's without words.
And in a way, it's also leading by example.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Eckhart Tolle said, if you get the inside right, the outside will fall into place.
Yes.
If we work more on ourselves, focus more on ourselves, then we can be guiding a light for others, maybe on a energetical level.
Yeah. Well, actually, that is what Lynn McTaggart does with
Yes.
her intention experiments,
Yes.
with the power of 8. And she found that if you're with a group of 8 and you send a positive intention, so not visualizing somebody in distress, but really visualizing a person fully energetic, fully healthy, fully happy, etc. If you do that, that person will feel it and maybe doesn't know what is happening, but it is creating a better energy for that person. But what she also found is with the groups that she is working longer with, that when you are not busy with just your own stuff, but just that love and that positiveness towards the world and toward other people, that it comes back to you. And somehow your energy level is changing. So in helping others, you're helping yourself.
Yes.
And I think that what we can do is not trying to reach people by saying you're wrong or this is wrong or what's this and you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. Send the love, be an example, be that balanced person yourself. And from that point, you will slowly start healing the world.
Oh, beautiful. Um, let's talk about the, let's say, the agenda of the administrators of the world. Um, they want to get rid of fiat money, our dollars and our euro. They are working on a central bank digital currency. I think one of the ways to get there is a total financial crash. This is one of the possible transitions to a central bank digital currency. Another thing that's happening right now is hypnotic transition. And this is a form of transition, and this is happening right now. And this is through induction of fear. They can put people who are still thinking critically into an artificial psychosis. And hypnotic transition is done in 3 ways: priming, programming, and of course propaganda, what's happening right now in the mainstream media. Are you not surprised by how easy it is to program the masses?
No, it has always been that way.
Okay.
It has always been that way. And the point is that if you can reach them on an instinctual level, you can easily program them. And we are mammals, and so we are animals. We forget that we think that we are above animals, but we are like animals. We also have instincts to survive. We have an instinct to survive the species, to survive as a person, as a group. And one of the things is that we are we need groups. The human being needs groups. He cannot live alone. That's from the earliest days of the existence of humanity has that been the case. Now, what happens is that if you are left out of the group, in prehistoric times, it meant death because you couldn't survive alone. And that's what we still know, not conscious, but our instincts know. And that means that people are afraid to not being longer part of their group or a group. And so they adapt to the group. And there have been a lot of experiments to show how people adapt to a group. And if the media create an image, what is the right way of looking at things and the right way of thinking, then you're going to think that, oh, maybe if I'm critical, I'm wrong because this is everybody says. Because the media pretends that everybody says, but it doesn't. And that's what in England, in Germany has been researched by Noelle, and I forgot her last name, but she researched polls, and she saw that slowly in elections, when elections were coming, that people in the beginning were thinking very different from what was shown on television, and in the due course they saw that they more and more grew towards what was televised and what was seen there as right. And the simple thing is that that's the she calls it the Schweigespirale, is the silent spiral, that those people who think different start to keep their mouths because they're afraid of being kicked out of the group.
Yeah.
And because they keep their mouths, more and more people think that they are alone in their thinking because there's nothing, they don't talk about it anymore. So that's a mechanism on an instinctual level. And the media are playing a very important role in that. And that can be abused by those in power. So, yes, I understand that. It's easy. And then if you use special tactics, and Joost Meerlo has written about those tactics that if you give them constant fear, then that fear keeps them in a situation in which they want to stay part of the group. That's that prehistoric instinct level, and they want to follow a leader.
Yeah.
And if the leader says the most barbaric and strange things, that doesn't matter. They need a leader.
Yeah.
And so people who are critical are a danger for them, because as long as they feel part of the group, and as long as they can look at a leader, and if you say he's telling rubbish, then they're going to blame you because you're taking away their security. And that's the polarization we see now. And there are a lot of other mechanisms playing a role too. But yes, I can see that. I can understand that. Because taking a different point, if we all know, for example, how dangerous face masks are, and how it deprives you from your oxygen, etc. But if you're walking in a supermarket without a face mask, people don't know how to react to you. Yeah. And you see people who actually would love to put their face mask off too. Others try to avoid you. So they don't know what to do with you. And that is, so it needs courage to stay who you are. But those who are more balanced, who have done what Jung says, shadow work, they stay true to themselves. And they can say, okay, this is the decision I take now, and I take fully the consequences, because this is me and this is what I want. But what you also see is that some people start to talk to you and want to know. And so you can help them. But that people are for quite a long time going with the narrative, that is known. That is known. And the point is that if you take measurement after measurement after measurement, and you slow it a little bit, that you give them a bit more freedom, and then new measurements, and then a little bit of freedom again, then they are just so shaken that the resistance is broken. And a real dictator works that way. That's what Meerlo describes excellent in his book. So, and actually that's what you see at the moment happening. And from my perspective, is it on purpose? Some people say it's done on purpose because those techniques are known. But even if it's not on purpose, the point is that some of the people who are in a power position, to the politicians who are in a power position, can be so, let's say, overwhelmed by the wrong narrative, that from their perspective they are doing the right thing. And so it's very difficult to see if it's all on purpose, or that people have just been caught by an idea or by wrong information. And there is a lot of wrong information. And because of the fact that the censorship is so big, it's the politicians don't have the time to read all the stuff and to get all the information. So they rely on what is offered to them. And those officials' institutes are also part of those who own the media, those who are in the World Economic Forum, etc. So about information, there's a lot of problems.
Absolutely. Karen, they, and with they I mean administrators of the world, they want a social credit system. They want a China environment with a digital ID connected to the blockchain, and everything you do and wherever you go will be traced. Everything will be programmed. With one click, they can decide where you can still spend money on. For instance, meat credits. They can say you can spend no more money on meat this month. If you do or say things they don't like, for instance, you say things that are critical towards the government, you can lose credit in the social credit system. So this is a system of total control that they would like. Let's say China is close to that already. Part of the mind control is, of course, the manipulation of scientific research. And there's a few books, and one of them is How to Lie with Statistics by Daryl Huff. And another book is a wonderful book, and it's Corporate Ties That Bind.
Yes.
The subtitle is An Examination of Corporate Manipulation and Vested Interest in Public Health, and this book is by Martin J. Walker. They are using scientific research, and they are manipulating this. And there's even now on, I think, Disney, there's a series about Purdue, and this is a company that's using changing statistics in order to sell more medicines, drugs that are actually opioids. So this already happened many times. What is your take on all this manipulation of scientific research that's happening right now?
Well, you have to go back to the movement of technocracy, and it's a movement that started already at the end of the 18th century with thoughts that only scientists and bankers and engineers and those kind of people, they should run the world, and not politicians or whatever, because those people were scientific and could use scientific rules to do the things as efficient and as methodological as possible. That's Comte de Saint-Germain started with that.
Yep.
And so kick out religion because that's no use, so let's make a scientific religion. But actually, from that moment on, you see that science has to be in service of. And if I skip a century, because the ideas stayed, and we come at the end of the 19th century, then we see that some people have risen to power in the banking industry. Think of J.P. Morgan, for example, the Rockefellers with a lot of money. They were institutes in their own, and they used all kinds of research. And then what you see is that if those who are that rich, if they have the wrong ideas, and the wrong ideas in my mind is not living your potential in a balanced way, but abusing your power. And for example, John Rockefeller, started to understand that you could make from oil also medicines. And he had a slogan in his mind, every ill a pill. And what he did was he was seen as a very nasty person, because he did a lot of nasty things. The way he was, he created his wealth and his power was just actually at the cost of others. But then he made a lot of propaganda for himself, a good PR machine. He started his own foundation, which is very lucrative because then you don't need to pay taxes. You just fund all kinds of things with your foundation, and it looks good. So what he started was funding the universities to give a new education in medicine, and he let people work for him to create the curriculum. And actually he changed it. He kicked out herbal medicine and all those things. The only thing that still that was still possible was giving medicine. Now, in older days, if you were becoming a doctor, you were studying the healing arts, and now we are studying medicine.
Yes.
So the word even changed. And so they started to finance that. They started to finance studies on this area, but also to show how bad herbal medicine is, etc. Yes. So there you see it starting. So as soon as money and conflict of interest come in, then you see that that science can be abused. And in the end, he transformed the whole way of how medicine is taught in America. There was just one way. He combined everything, and that's what's still happening. So what he started is still there, and he also started the vaccine industry. Yeah. And it is, and actually Bill Gates just stepped on the train that was already running, and he just joined.
And this is $1 billion industry.
It's $1 billion industry. Yeah. And so you see everywhere, you see that as soon as there is power and there is no empathy, and it's just for to further your own glory, then you see that science can be abused.
Yes.
And there are a lot of scientists who are doing excellent work, but again, you have to get subsidies.
Yes, and that's
and
hard.
and it's hard.
Yeah.
And if you can get easy subsidies for a certain kind of research, then you are happy. But I know that, for example, some of the climatologists or those who are oceanographists who really are good in their field, and it's part of what I've studied, so I can see that if they had some criticism about climate change ideas, and they just lost their job.
Oh.
Now, what are you going to do if you are working and you love your work and you get a subsidy for something? You maybe you don't agree with that, but you get a subsidy, or otherwise you lose your job and maybe you can't pay your house anymore. You know, these are dilemmas. We mustn't easily judge them.
No.
And it takes courage then to stand up and say, no, I think it's different. And there are people who did it, but there are a lot of people who cannot. You know, I also know from some policemen personally that they hate the situation as it is now, and that they hate having to be sent to demonstrations, anti-corona demonstrations, because they say, I don't want it, but I lose everything. And if I show that I have pity with those people, then other police agents are laughing at me. So they keep their mouth. And I can understand that, because it's so difficult. You're losing so much if you are different. And then we get that instinct level again that's playing a role. Now, if you look at those in power, once you have been in power with money for 8 years or more, your brain is changing. We know that from neurofinance and neuropsychology. And you get less empathy. And then that means that love is disappearing. And that means more power, more need for power comes in. Now, how can you be powerful? That is by controlling everybody and everything. Now I come to 1934, and that is the technocracy movement started there. Really, there were already some little movements before that, but then the technocracy movement started, and Wood has written beautiful books on that. You really should read that, and you see how it's going. And the technocracy movement, technocracy means let us rule the world on scientific principles, and taking care that there is, and it's beautiful, no environmental damage, that there's no loss of energy, that we do everything as good as possible, as methodic and efficient as possible. But that means that everybody has to live in the same type of house with the same type of furniture, has the same basic income, has to obey the same rules, and we make work shifts that there's a 24-hour work day, and so everything is then going smooth and running smooth. But you are not allowed to say what you want, because the education system must be transformed in such a way that there's only one truth. And so that's that movement. And if you read the study guide, and I really spelled it out, and then you see that they wanted a 24/7 control of every movement, everything that you bought, everything that you did, just to control the energy levels. That was their idea. But they didn't have the means to do that at that time. But now they have. Yes. And so now they can do it with all the computers, etc., and artificial intelligence. And at that time, at the technocracy movement beginning, their idea was to not to work with money anymore, but with energy certificates. Yeah. And that is, how much energy did you use to buy this product, to travel from here to there? And if you have those certificates, then you can only use so much in a month or 2 months. And this is what you get. And after a couple of time, it's invalid anymore. Even if you haven't used everything, it's invalid. So you every time get a little bit. You cannot save because it's becoming invalid. And they wanted control over what you did through those energy certificates. And what you see now it is actually it's not the energy certificate, although some credit card companies already have coupled your expenses to energy. And if you have had too many expenses, they can just show you are on the top of your energy. So there is that idea already.
Yes.
But now, having a digital money, they can combine that with what you are buying and where you are traveling, etc. So what is happening now is exactly what the technocracy incorporation wanted in 1934, but wasn't able to do by then. And it also means no democracy. It means total control. It means no saying whatever. It means that everything is forbidden except that what is allowed to you. And that's the way we are heading now,
Yes.
according to that group that wants to administer the world with one world government.
Yes.
And in that group, in 1973, the Trilateral Commission started, and actually they picked up the ideas of the technocracy, and they are involved in the Bilderberg, in the Council on Foreign Relations, in Davos, in the World Economic Forum. So what you see is that very slowly they have moved towards this point, and we have now the means technically to implement it.
Yes, and they're moving forward and they have time to do it.
Yes.
Karen, I have a book here, and that book is Superclass.
Yes.
Let's show it into the camera. Superclass by David Rothkopf. And he describes that there are basically, let's say, 6,600 people in the superclass. And the subtitle is The Global Power Elite and the World They Are Making. And what is interesting is that only 6% is women, so 94% is male. Maybe that's not a surprise. But in this book, the author describes three important pillars, and you mentioned them already. You have the Bilderberg Conference. This started in the early 50s and was initiated by Prince Bernhard. You have the Trilateral Commission, founded by David Rockefeller and let's say Brzezinski in 1973. And then you have the World Economic Forum, founded in January 1971 by Klaus Schwab.
Actually, that must be the Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay.
That's one that you really have to add. That's
the fourth one.
Yeah,
actually.
Actually, they were founded in 1918 after the First World War, and the members of the Trilateral Commission come from the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Council on Foreign Relations is just for America, and the Trilateral Commission is initially for America, Europe, and Japan.
Yes.
And Bilderberg is for the whole world, and the World Economic Forum is for the whole world.
Yes.
And the World Economic Forum actually is implementing everything, and you can see that as the instrument for those groups just to really put forward their program and to take action.
And if you look at the Bilderberg Conference, Trilateral Commission, World Economic Forum, and the Council on Foreign Relations, they like technocracy, they like eugenics.
Yes, and Marxism.
Those three things.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this, and let's talk about the rise of technocracy. And there's two books, Trilaterals over Washington, volume 1 and 2. You showed them to me earlier, by Professor Anthony C. Sutton and Patrick M. Wood.
Yeah.
And this is the documented story of the organization and members of the Trilateral Commission, founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller and Brzezinski. And the specific purpose of the Trilateral Commission was to create a new international economic order.
Yes, and what is behind that is a world government.
One world government.
Yeah, and the one world government was already older. You see that already as an idea at the end of the 19th century. The Fabian Society founded.
And this is much older for the Fabian Society.
Yeah, that's 1884 it is founded, and that was already heading for a one world government.
Yes, and their weapon is, I think, a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yes, they have two weapons. They had two weapons. One day, the wolf in sheep's cloth, they skipped that one, and the turtle. They have a turtle, and the turtle says, "We have the time," and it means that they were willing to wait 100 years, but because they said, if you go as a turtle, very slowly implement a little rule and another little thing, then people keep thinking that they are in a democracy, but in the meantime you've taken away everything and they haven't noticed. That's the turtle, very, very slowly. And then the wolf in sheep's cloth is actually that we pack it in the most beautiful words, but as the time is there, we are the wolf and make an aggressive step.
Yes.
That was actually the idea. Now they skipped the wolf in sheep cloth.
Yes.
You can see it in old books still,
yes.
but the whole idea of the turtle, that's still going on. And members of the Fabian Society, they were also eugenics. They were also wanting to have less population of the world.
Yes.
Part of them are also part of the Trilateral Commission or are in the World Economic Forum. So or in Bilderberg. So what you see is that those different groups are partly the same people.
Yes. Karen, we have here 2 other books by Patrick M. Wood, and the first one is Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. And the other one is also by Patrick M. Wood, and that's Technocracy, the Hard Road to World Order. And I hope they're in the frame. Yes? Okay, great. Patrick M. Wood says that the only logical outcome of technocracy is scientific dictatorship. And as already seen in dystopian literature such as Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, published in 1932, and of course the famous 1984 by George Orwell, published in 1948.
They were all part of this movement.
And they were all part of this movement.
And the Fabian Society.
And the Fabian Society, yes. But both books looked straight into the face of technocracy when it was still in its infancy. Yes. But they already knew that this was going to happen. So they must have known that the technology would be available in the future.
When you see how quick science developed in those days, look at the end of the 19th century, you saw really that we got a car, we had trains, and there was such a development that you could actually envision that the technology would proceed. And what they were part of the Fabian Society, and
you meaning Huxley and Orwell,
and Wells and others who also wrote books. Yes. They're famous books. And you know what I tell everybody is that the Fabian Society started in 1884, and they said we can take 100 years. So why was the title 1984? That is because they knew they were part of that movement, and they were fully in it. The whole Huxley family was full in it, and what few people know is that from the Huxley family, Julian Huxley, part of the Fabian Society, part of the Bilderberg, he was part of the ones who originated the World Wildlife Fund. And also UNICEF. He was the first director of UNICEF. And if you look at the starting guide of UNICEF, it already says that they have to take care that somehow the world population and eugenics, that we have to look very carefully at that. There's also the idea of a world government. So you see actually that all those United Nations institutions, they are already part of that world government movement. And what few people know is that the Council on Foreign Relations, and that's so important to know, and that's very well researched by Shoup, that during the Second World War, I think about 1942 or 1943, they were able to form a group very close to the president and work together with the president. And they helped
Jimmy
the president.
Carter.
No, this was Jimmy Carter, was in 1973.
Okay,
this was during the World War, Roosevelt. And this group said internally that America had to become the biggest country and the most influential country after the war. And they talked about their plan, and which they called the Grand Area, which means whatever is possible in the world, we want to be there. Because they needed their raw materials from the whole world, and they wanted everywhere bases, military bases. And so they were already thinking about what they could do after the World War had ended. And they actually would loved also to have Germany on board after the war, and also China and Russia, actually to be America most dominant. And they already understood that if it was America who was working on that grand area idea, that everybody would say America is an imperialist. So they said, we must create an institution that looks very neutral, but in which we are very influential at back doors.
Yes.
And that was the United Nations. So there are minutes in which they have proposed. They have made, I don't know the English word for it, the Dutch is handvest. It is the rules and regulations about the United Nations is written by the Council on Foreign Relations. And the whole idea of how to set it up and how to manage is written by the Council on Foreign Relations. And they gave it to the president, and the president was very enthusiastic and signed it and declared it that the United
And it was
Nations
Roosevelt, indeed.
was Roosevelt,
Yeah.
yes.
So
And so what you see is that from the beginning, the United Nations had a secret purpose from the view of the Council on Foreign Relations to once become the world government. And look what's happening now.
That's happening.
That's happening now.
happening
So that was from the beginning, even during the World War, was that. And that's why I think the Council on Foreign Relations is so important. And the Council on Foreign Relations, first it was just a dinner club from intellectuals and bankers, etc. But it developed in this power club in New York. And they started to deliver the secretaries for the governments, no matter if it's a Republican or a Democratic government.
Yes.
So a lot of people from the Council on Foreign Relations were secretaries of the government and or on other high positions. And when the Trilateral Commission started in 1973, the American members, most of them, were also member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission then also gave the ministers there, the government. Most of them were from the Council on Foreign Relations and from the Trilateral Commission, and so they wanted that one world government, and it has been all along pushing that idea.
Slowly but surely.
Yes.
So the Council on Foreign Relations was founded in 1921.
1918 they started actually.
Okay.
But the real foundation was later, but the actual they came together in 1918.
And one of the key figures became Brzezinski.
Yes.
And he was a diplomat and a political scientist. And you could say that he was in the category of people like Henry Kissinger and Samuel Huntington. He wrote a few books, and one of those books is Between Two Ages. And in this book, he explains that the world has to go to a technocracy and a one world government. And here you have it again: technocracy, Marxism, and eugenics. And,
it's everything from the technocracy movement from 1934 is actually in a new way. You know, because of the war, you couldn't talk about eugenics anymore.
Yeah, because of the Nazis.
So it became a family planning and all other nice words, but it's still the same.
Yes.
And he took all those ideas and speaks about the technotronic area. And if you look at him, then his idea is actually a technological Marxist society as a final stage with a one world government. And that's the basic idea that David Rockefeller loved. And so that's why they both connected. David Rockefeller went to Brzezinski and said, we must do something. And so this is how the Trilateral Commission came into being. And this has been the goal all along.
Yes. But people could say that, you know, if you really start to look at what eugenics really is, that it's scary. So eugenics, it's the selection of desired heritable characteristics to improve future generations, typically, of course, in reference to humans. And the term eugenics was coined in 1883 by British explorer and natural scientist Francis Galton, who was influenced by Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. So Francis Galton advocated a system that would allow the more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing over the less suitable.
Yes.
And so we are talking here about social Darwinism, which is basically survival of the fittest. And, you know, the Nazis used these ideas as well. So people would say this is scary.
It is. Well, the point is, if you go through the end of the 19th century,
Yeah.
Francis Galton, Darwin, Mendel, the whole scientific thought was indeed that the survival of the fittest, but that you can also change the breed, as it was said, by selective breeding. And there were some people, some important people, who said, well, why can't we do, why are we only doing this with cattle, and why can't we do this with people?
Yeah.
And because of the idea that the survival of the fittest, those who were rich at those times, they really believed that they were rich because they had, if you put it in modern word, better genes.
Yeah.
And those who are poor, they had lesser genes, so they were worthless for society. That was their idea. So it was just almost a scientific idea, but totally misinterpreted.
Yes.
And that means that there were even people who said, then we don't need to help the poor people because it's better that they're not there.
Yes.
And it was also that the very poor children in London, there were ships coming from America, and they took away the poor children in the streets of London as slaves, and they were brought to America as slaves. And the slavery of the white ended decades later than the slavery of the blacks. It was the slavery of the poor, and it had all to do with eugenics.
Yes.
And then you see the Rockefellers were very active in that eugenic movement, and they paid for a lot.
Wow.
And we see really important people like the writer Bernard Shaw, we see Wells, we see really important people of that time who are pro eugenics.
Yes. Yes.
And still, what you see, and if you look now, the eugenics was really meant to improve humanity.
Yeah.
Because if you filter out those with the bad genes, then you improve humanity.
Yeah.
And if you have then good selective breeding, then you can improve humanity even more. Now, how can we nowadays improve humanity? That is transhumanism.
Yes, so that's the next step
That's
in
the next
eugenics.
step.
Yeah,
It's actually the next step
and
in
that's
eugenics.
really what Klaus Schwab is advocating on television. So, but by World War I, many scientific authorities and political leaders supported eugenics, and then of course it ultimately failed because of the fact that the Nazis used eugenics to support the extermination of entire races.
Hitler did send a delegation to California to learn how to do it.
Yeah, yes, yeah, it's incredible. So Brzezinski wrote Between Two Ages. Again, a technocratic society, one world government, and then David Rockefeller really loves the book and he wants to help realize the technocratic society and the one world government. And then they start the Trilateral Commission, and they pull Jimmy Carter in their sphere of influence.
And actually, from that moment on, every president has been in their sphere of influence.
Except for Trump.
Except for Trump.
That's why he was firing so many people, because they were connected to the Trilateral Commission.
Yes, yes. As soon as he saw that they are going against what he wanted, he fired them.
Yes. Yeah, so Trump was aware of this. So members of the Rockefeller family are more visible in crucial positions than, for instance, the Rothschilds. Mm-hmm. But I could also argue that, you know, the Rothschilds are Jews, that the Rothschilds like eugenics not so much, given the fact that the Nazis were proponents of eugenics. Or is that not a factor that is in play?
No, that isn't. You know, the point is that it's not bound to being a Jew or not a Jew.
Okay.
It's the idea of improving human race, and that is an idea that is in both camps. Yeah. And the Rothschilds are on the background, but they are very important investors in all the industries that of which some of them are also in the eugenetic field and the
Yes.
transhumanism field, etc.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Rothschilds, because we're talking more about the Rockefellers. The Rothschild dynasty started, let's say, in 1800 in Frankfurt, and they started from humble beginnings.
Yes.
You know, they are a very, very young dynasty, and we could say that they made their money through wars. They made their money financing wars. One of the people that was not a friend of the Rockefellers was Napoleon Bonaparte,
Yes.
who wanted to change things, who wanted to get rid of the elites, I think, in his time. And of course, he crowned himself emperor, so maybe that's a little bit of a contradiction. But in history books, Napoleon has been described as a dictator. But if you start to look at his intentions, Napoleon actually was trying to do some good, I think.
Well, that's from the Book of Gold,
Yeah.
and a central banker from South Africa who has studied the history of central banking was giving that story. And what you see is that actually, what I would like to stress is that every measure has a shadow side. Everything that the government decides has a shadow side. What did Europe in that time? What Europe in that time did, that was the Jews were not allowed to function in special occupations. They were not part of the whole society. So the Jews were forced to live in their own quarters, and they were hardly allowed to participate in society. The only thing that they were allowed to do was just working with money. So what we see is that Europe itself is at fault because they gave them the opportunity to become masters in money.
Yeah.
And if you deny a person power or a group power, and it gets an instrument that it can use to get power, it will improve its situation. And that is what happened, if you look at an objective way. So that they became masters of money, and they were very smart, so they found all kinds of ways. As such, that's okay.
Yeah.
But then becoming rich, they started to see how they could make even more money.
Yeah.
And there the shadow sides comes in, because from that moment on, they started to actually talk to kings to get into war, because as soon as a king gets to war, they have to lend moral, they have to borrow money, and who can give them the money? Those are the Rothschilds. So they became powerful but they also became powerful in central banks. They became powerful other places, and they had such a good information system, because the Jews were everywhere in the world, and they had their own people traveling to each other. So they often had more earlier the information about what was going on in the world than others. And so you see that because of they were shattered everywhere in the world, because of they were denied so much, they became the top people in the financial world.
Because they had no other space.
They had no other space. So that's actually what Europe itself did. And then, because they became a kind of shadow side because of instigating wars, and that was what Napoleon didn't want. And in that time, it was normal to be crowned as a king or emperor, because otherwise the people wouldn't follow you. That was the system at that time. And but the people loved Napoleon, and Napoleon said to the Rothschilds, I'm not going to borrow money from you. I'm going to reform the payment system, etc., because I want the people to have a good income and a good living. And that is, of course, so the Rothschilds didn't have a grip on France, and they had a grip on England, on the different kingdoms in Germany, etc. And they didn't want it. They wanted a grip on France, and so they are the ones who set up the other kings against Napoleon. But the winner is always the writer of the history books.
Of course. Yeah, that's true.
And so Napoleon is now seen as a dictator. But maybe we have to rewrite the history.
Absolutely. We talked about eugenics, and we said transhumanism is the next step. And we have people like Elon Musk. Elon Musk, very well known. He's, I think, the richest man in the world right now. He's got Tesla, SpaceX. And he says the only way to survive is to merge with artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is going to be a big threat in the future. And you have singularity the moment that, let's say, artificial intelligence becomes more aware and intelligent than humans, and then they can take over. And he says the only way to prevent that is to merge with AI. Is he also working for the transhumanism slash eugenics movement, or is he right about that?
No, I think neither of them. I think that he is a very strange person, has very strange ideas, very creative, and a difficult personality at the same time. I don't think that he is really the person who is an instrument for AI, etc., because he himself believes this, and it's from himself, as far as I can see as an outsider, of course. But there's one thing that they all overlook. We are living in our Western paradigm, and that can only think in terms of improving our cells, improving our brain, and they simply have no clue how great our brain is, how powerful our thoughts are, how powerful our mind is,
And our soul.
And that there will never ever be a robot that will get the soul of a human being. And a robot has no chakras.
Like Pinocchio, he wanted to be a real boy, but he never had the soul. That's what he wanted.
But the point is that as long as we are looking at this very narrow stuff and not taking into account what a tremendous great creatures human beings are, if you live your full potential, if you use that power of your mind, then AI isn't a threat, and you can improve yourself. If I look at some of the Tibetan monks, who can in the middle of the snow, they can heat themselves, that the steam comes from their body. Look at Wim Hof, the Iceman. Look what we can do with the power of our mind. You can walk on fire. There's so much possible. And our soul is, we are so connected with the cosmos that if you only can think technologically, you see improvement only on a technological field. But that's not us.
No.
That's not who we are as a human being.
That's not our real potential.
No, it's not our real potential.
Karen, of course, the elephant in the room right now is the Great Reset. And the Great Reset is an effort to rethink the global economy. And the slogan of the technocracy and the slogan of the Great Reset is that in 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. And this is not a conspiracy,
no,
because it's candidly spoken about and explicitly stated. So that's not a conspiracy. That's an agenda.
It's in their own movies of the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, but if you in 2030 is in 8 years from now, we're almost in 2022. Then in order to own nothing and be happy about it, you have to be completely mind controlled. How do you see that?
The point is that look what is happening now due to the lockdowns. How many people cannot survive? How many people are losing their business and are full of debt? So there is now a movement to forgive your debt.
Yeah.
And then you can stay living in your house, and that's the idea. You can still travel through a car, but everything is not yours anymore, but you can still use it. And so that's the idea, that you still can have a living, that you have your basic income, that you have a house, that you have a car, that you can work, and you have no debt. Now that sounds very positive for people, but having no possessions means that you are forever dependent.
Yeah.
And so they're creating on purpose a dependency to fulfill this agenda. And there are some people whose voices are silenced, and those are not conspiracies, but these are professors, etc., who warn that this is part of that the lockdowns are also part of this movement, just to break the middle class, to fulfill this agenda. And if you have nothing, but you have no if you have no debts anymore. Actually, that is the idea, again, from the study guide of technocracy in 1934, where they say that everything is owned by the collective,
Yeah.
which actually means the elite,
Yeah.
and everybody has a house, everybody has furniture,
Yeah.
everybody has food, everybody has an income,
Yeah.
so they must be happy. But you know, if you look at the part of the study cards is talking about how the technocrats look at human beings, and they see human beings as the dogs of Pavlov,
Yeah.
and that you can program them, and that almost robot-like.
Yeah.
And that's not a human being. That's not our creative potential.
No.
And that's absolutely going to revolt. It will not revolt in everybody, because there will always a group of people who say, this is nice, I don't need to do that much and I have my income, etc. But most people will feel the knock on the door inside of their creativity. And there are always people who find creative ways just to escape the rules. Look at what is happening now. That's
Yes.
still there. And so
Become more creative. Yeah.
they're not going this is, and if I then look at the times that are coming astrologically, which we get a totally different mindset in a positive
Yeah.
way, in which the individual creativity will be more important.
Yeah.
That's in a couple of years that will unfold more.
Yes.
Then when I look at that, then I see that you cannot sit in your home saying, okay, I have a basic income and I'm enjoying Netflix and nothing else.
Yes.
You know, it's not going to work. But
Yes.
because they have the wrong ideas about what a human being is,
Yes.
they don't have an idea about the soul.
Yeah.
They have no idea about spirituality. It's all kicked out.
Yeah.
Science has to be the religion,
Yeah.
and the scientist the priest. You know, it's such a revolt against what a human being really is, what a soul really is, what your inner authenticity really is, what
Yes.
your creativity
Yes.
is, what the power of your mind is. It's simply not gonna work.
Wow. So in closing, let's talk about a little bit more about why you are convinced that they will not be able to reach their goals. But first, I would like to address this, that I think there are three big cards they can play in order to achieve total control and a one world government. One is climate change. One is the virus that's happening right now, and there's also another card, and Werner von Braun warned about this. A fake alien invasion, possibly. That's another card they can play. Let's say a 9/11, but then it's an alien invasion. Yeah. And if you look at what's happening in the media, it seems that they're priming us a little bit already for, hey, yes, the Pentagon has released video footage and information that there actually are UFOs and etc.
Yeah, well, the main rule of a very important rule of the Trilateral Commission is keep people in fear.
Yeah.
And so a part of the people will stay in fear. That is simply what it is. But the fact that it's so against human creativity, as I said, is that those who are in fear, they have also they create less antibodies against illnesses, etc. So it's really also a bodily thing. They will have a really hard time. Yeah. But those who are creative, what I said, they will find ways. Yes. And
the soul will find ways.
The soul will find ways. And there is something else that I expect, and that is that some of the things will turn against them, because the whole agenda of climate change is that we are getting so hot that the earth cannot bear it. But the point is that in Roman times, it was, if I remember well, but one of the times I saw the Roman times, it was hotter on earth than now. Yeah. And if you look at all the civilizations and you look at the temperature on earth, and we can reconstruct those temperatures. If you look at the temperatures on earth and civilizations, what you see is that if we had high civilizations, temperature on earth was high. And when the civilizations broke, when temperature was low. And what you see now is that there is a direct correlation, a scientific correlation between the solar spot cycles and temperature on Earth. Yes. And you can also explain why there is that correlation. Yeah. Even the NASA says that there is a correlation. But the strange thing is that we are now entering an almost spotless a period that can take decades. Yeah. And in all the historic times, we see that spotless sun or just very few sunspot means that the temperature is dropping several degrees, the average temperature.
Yes.
And we have had a little ice age. If you look at the paintings at that time, you see them skating on the Thames, etc. And so, and we are now entering. It started already in that low sunspot phase, taking decades. This means that the tendency is in the direction of colder.
Yeah.
So the thing is that they have totally misjudged the creativity and the spirituality of the human soul. That's one thing. The second thing is that it seems that they have misjudged the climate situation. So I'm curious what's going to happen in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And they have misjudged also the way things were going with the whole virus situation. And what you see is that we are now entering a period where they want to try everything just to keep the narrative going. But I see already that there are holes in the narrative. And if you look at the astrology at the moment, we see that we are ending a couple of years of fear, and we have been in a very, very difficult situation that is, I've never seen in the whole astrological history a combination we have had in 2020. We have had 3 planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, together on one point, and that's happening only 7 times in 1,000 years.
Wow.
And for the first time, it was in that little part of the zodiac where what we call the dictator degrees. So that was, so when I saw that coming already years ago, I warned my students, and with the financial crisis, I said, just wait, the worst still has to come, because that was this. So we are now at a point that is more important than we think, and it's a point for which I have to go back 2,500 years. And why? Because that was the Greek time, and in the Greek time we had Plato. I've already talked about him, and Plato said the only thing that is real in the world isn't real, because the real reality is behind that, what you cannot see. So the unseen world is actually the most important. And his student Aristotle said the opposite. He said the only thing you can do is studying the world and nothing else, because the unseen you can see. So it was actually an idea of the unseen versus the seen, the mind versus matter. And it has been a polarity for 2,500 years.
Yes.
And what you see is that at periods in time, Plato was more important, and then Aristotle came, and then Plato, Aristotle. It has never been combined. And what you see now is that in the last century, we see that we have been diving so deep in the world of matter. But at the same time, those who were diving deep came on quantum level. And there you see that things happened that you couldn't explain in the material world. And then you see Fritjof Capra, Gary Zukav, and others who came actually to the conclusion that there is metaphysics in science.
Yes.
And the book The Tao of Physics, etc., the Dancing Wu Li Masters, they're brilliant books to read. So what you see is that actually science itself starts to discover spirituality. It means that matter starts to discover the world of the unseen.
Yes.
And what is happening now in this time, where this triple conjunction, this very difficult situation in heaven that we've seen, is actually the final breakpoint, that we cannot continue with a society, with a paradigm that keeps matter and spirit separate.
Yes.
So it's going to merge.
Yes.
And this is the beginning, this time of the blackness in the world and all these dystopian things. This is the beginning, this is the birth of the combining of the feminine and masculine, of spirit and matter. And we are the persons who have to give birth to that. But that's the development, and that's why I'm so absolutely hopeful.
So then the spirit, the soul, the higher self, oneness will win.
Yes.
And we have to shift to a holistic approach.
Yes. And it will grow, and it will grow slowly. But look at everywhere are people connecting now. And they are not connecting about the basis from how much can you fund, but it's how can we together make another kind of society.
Yeah.
That's what's happening now. So you see everywhere those little things, and the fact that what I told, like Lynn McTaggart already, working with the power of 8. If I look at Joe Dispenza, at Bruce Lipton, and so many others that are already preparing this way. And so I think that once we are crushed through what is going on, crushed in a way that the World Economic Forum wants the Great Reset. I think we are going to another Great Reset.
Yeah.
And that's the reset of spirit and matter coming together, the masculine and feminine coming together and creating a new society. And it takes maybe decades. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
We are part of this birth.
Yes. And is this also happening, because you mentioned this, that the Saturn-Pluto cycle will end at the end of this year?
The Saturn-Pluto cycle, you have every couple of years, you have that they come together.
Yeah.
And then in those times, people are more easily fearful, and you can, and if you seldom fear, they will feel more fearful. Yeah. But that's ending actually at the end of this year. And that means that if you want to make people fearful, it's not going to work that well anymore as it did.
Yes. Yes.
So there are several things that are going to change. But of course, the old structure will not give in that easily. Yeah. So it means that it may be a very difficult time still ahead. But don't worry. Yeah. If you work on yourself to bring spirit and matter together, live in this world the fullest, but be spiritual, then you're part of the creation of that new society.
Yes. And actually this shift to the oneness perspective, to the soul, to the higher self, is actually being accelerated by the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission, by people like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. They are actually accelerating our evolution, right?
Well, that's what Jung calls the principle of the enantodromia, which means that everything turns into its opposite. And if something has been very much in going one way, and this is that one-sided masculine way of thinking that we have, and material way of thinking we've been in, then all of a sudden it will just jump to the other side, and the period in between is the forces of dark. It is chaos, and that's where we are in. But we are jumping to the other side.
Yes, it's so beautiful. You mentioned the Dancing Woolly Masters by Gary Zukav. After the Dancing Woolly Masters, he wrote The Seed of the Soul. Yes. And in The Seed of the Soul, he talks about two kinds of powers. One is external power, and we've been talking about that extensively today. External power is, let's say, power over, trying to have power over, but there's also another kind of power that he speaks about, and this is authentic power. And authentic power is when your personality makes the conscious decision to start serving the energy of the soul. And when you can create, when you're creating authentic power, you start to manifest the intentions of your soul. The intentions of your soul. You start to identify, what does my soul want, instead of what does my personality want. And what's happening right now, I think, with the people who are in power, they're working from the ego, the personality. But there is an answer from other people who are saying, no, we will work from the soul now. We will connect with our soul now. And that's really interesting. And in a way you could say, and maybe you don't like to use this word, that this is a spiritual war that's going on.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Karen, in A Tale of Two Cities, there's a quote, "This is the worst of times, but this is also the best of times." And I think that's where we're at right now. But it really warms my heart to see that you're so positive, because I'm very positive as well, because we have a great opportunity here to make a leap to our soul, to our higher self.
Yes.
And this is actually, I think, part of our human and spiritual evolution. What's happening right now, we are growing up as humanity, and that's what's happening. I want to thank you so much for comparing notes, for having us here in your beautiful library, your sanctuary. It was an honor and privilege to be able to spend time with you this way, and I hope you can keep up this important work that you're doing. Thank you so much,
Thank
Karen.
you very much.
Thank you.